everyone. I'm Brian, and this is Manuel, and what we're going to do, we're going to be playing through, and we've done something interesting. I've purposely avoided playing this game because I want to do my responses to it completely cold, as though I'm a completely novice player, whereas Manuel is the experienced player, and he's going to be sort of being my guide through the world.
콜레링아이적 인여고는 데레간 약하가네 빌리고 데레간 약 다음나 알라둔 인기적
Get to be the adorable fox. Oh wait. Is it that then? Actually, you're the fox man though.
Let's trade. We were worried about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of your basic, puzzle platformer.
Oh, nice. Yeah, sir. I already like the feeling that I'm following you here. That I'm kind of alone and not entirely. And it's interesting. The feel of my jump is really interesting. I feel kind of slightly limited with my jump. There's a little hesitancy to it, which is also a really interesting tactile sensation to get as I'm playing it.
My jump is also like a bit more fluid.
Yeah, you look like you're a little more mobile than I am, whereas whoa. Oh no. That also was really nice. I liked the way that I landed. That also was really nice. The animation there, like the way I landed and kind of like skidded a little, or the way I went over, I really like. It's a very childlike way of falling, and which sort of suggests that there is. Like when kids fall, it's not as bad as when an adult falls, and there's a slight sense of safety there that I'm getting from these animations. It's a feeling of like, oh, there's a potential danger here, but it's not entire. I'm not feeling antagonized.
Oh, we should probably wait. There's gonna be a gust in a second. Hit B to brace against the wind.
Okay.
One of my favorite things about this game is the language.
Oh, that's a very magical moment. I like the sense of how the spirits within the world are presented as really being embedded in it. It's a completely natural thing, as though it's not like an otherly worldly presence intruding, but it is really being presented just as something that is completely natural and sort of omnipresent. Another nice animation detail I really appreciate, when the fox braces, he does what's similar to a canine play bow.
Ah. Oh no.
Oh. Oh. Yeah, you actually crouch down as though you're ready to play.
No.
No, 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 no.
Again.
Oh.
sit here and brace.
Yeah. Yeah, that posture right there with the flicking tail, that's sort of classic come play with me. No, no, no.
Oh, that was close. Even the hang animation is pretty funny. I like how the filter. Oh,
Wait, what is my crouch? Is it?
here we go. I got you.
Ah, I can't crouch. So again, it's another
Yeah. Jump down here.
lower the.
Whoa.
Oh, that was nice. That felt really good.
I think we could just keep going.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, that's what it is.
Uh-oh. There we go.
It's really interesting how the mechanics are working here, but because you're helping me so much, I'm really developing this real kind of warmth towards you. It reminds me a lot of Ico, where a lot of the character relationships are expressed through the actions that you're performing in the game, and the fact that that you're doing things for me, that you're sort of making things possible, is sort of defining my way I feel like I'm relating to you. It's a really interesting experience.
I think Ico as a co-op experience would be like really cool.
Yeah. I assume that's where we're.
Can we play any more? Here we go. Is that all that we're supposed to play? Yeah, I guess it is.
Okay. Yeah, I just assumed we were going to have more.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I think we could talk a little bit about, I mean, as a designer, I find it's really interesting for me as an emotional experience what we were seeing here, because it was very clear that the mechanics that were being expressed, there was a real relationship that was being developed there, and it wasn't a relationship that was being sort of like imposed onto the player as something that's being told through a cutscene. Everything that's being expressed is being expressed mechanically as you're playing the game, which I found really much more visceral in terms of my experience. My relationship towards you as the fox felt really defined by our various mechanics, and I haven't played further, but so like I felt like I wanted to have the opportunity to help you.
Yeah.
That like there's this reciprocity that's being expressed that is, for me, unfulfilled in the section we're playing. So as you get later in the game, is there more of a feeling of that there's...
Definitely. There's definitely parts where each of the characters is helping the other. What I find interesting about this game is any two people can pick it up, and so long as they have just a very basic understanding of each other, they'll get along. Like you and I pretty much just met in the last 15 minutes. But we were able to, play the game and actually progress because of the fact that, in a very limited space, we were able to work together.
Yeah. So, so with the development of this game, I think you're much more familiar with the circumstances of the development than I am. How did the sort of workings within the community, how did that lead to this particular production?
Well, you can definitely see it in the art style, in the way that the spirits are integrated within the game, and also in the way that the various culturally relevant animals are represented in the game. For example, we had the owl, and the owl served as the save point, and also as the checkpoint, because within that culture, owls serve that purpose. They're protectors, and they guide people. So the fact that this was a game developed with the community really shows in how pure everything is. Everything really is connected to the people that poured their hearts out into it.
I think you said you had seen people play it who were part of the community.
Yeah.
And how do they respond to it?
Oh, for all of the people that I have seen from the community play it really loved it. And even within other cultures, for example, Cherokee or Taino like me, we're not Inuit, we're not anywhere near the north, so even we were impressed by it. Like, this was finally a game that was actually, for our, for our people, made by our people, which is pretty much like never happened before.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to appropriate images and pull them out of context, and then just sort of use them as like this sort of generic veneer of nativeness over something. But the fact that this feels like it is actually a story that people are telling about themselves, I think is part of its power.
And you definitely see it. I've given talks before about indigenous representation in media, and one of the examples that always comes up is like Assassin's Creed, and that was made with the community in mind, but not actually with the community being, not with the community participating on like an everyday level.
Yep.
So there are parts where, in the earlier Assassin's Creed games, they went with a specific kind of narrative to tell a certain part of the story, but then in 3, there's a part where you go through the same kind of narrative, but they switch it to a spirit journey. Like, I don't think anyone from that community was going to say, "Yeah, let's go on a spirit journey."
Right.
Whereas this was actually made with the community, and they, this is technically a spirit journey, but it's a spirit journey. Like, the entire context is built around that.
Right, but its setup is something that's very much natural. There's no feeling of this being supernatural. This is the aspects that we as contemporaries might think of as supernatural. Instead, they're expressed as simply features of the natural world, as features of the environment. And I think that's a really nice approach, because then when I'm interacting with these the spirits within the world, they have a weightiness and a reality to them. And I feel like I can already begin to develop a relationship with them. The fact, the way that they sort of like offer their hands to me, the postures of it, it feels very, very much like, let us show you something that's not othered, but that is a way to step into a world where the otherness slips away, and it becomes something that becomes something you can sort of understand what it's like to inhabit that world. I think in a very performative way, in a way that it's not just, here we're going to show you these things and like it's cultural appreciation, but let's give you this very small taste of existing within this sort of world, to sort of step into somebody else's shoes.
I think that also goes back to how culturally a lot of indigenous people in North America view spirits and view nature. Like, my name within my tribe is Huracan, and Huracan is the god of death and hurricanes. But, I was given the name as a teenager because I had this tendency to, break everything down and then rebuild it. And if you look at the environmental impact of a hurricane, they always happen in lush, very alive areas. You can't have a rainforest rainforest without a hurricane. So, like the way that we see nature is as both our friend and enemy all at once, and we see it as a very big part of our everyday life. Where I don't think a lot of colonial or European cultures that came over see spirits in that same way.
Yeah, things are sort of defined as being a natural opposition to the natural world, and that the natural is something to be conquered or overcome or defeated or pushed away, rather than it's something that is to live within. It's interesting, this is a complete just riff out of the blue. My wife is a medieval historian, and one of the things that, it's a similar sort of othering that is involved with the Middle Ages, with the European Middle Ages, is it's very easy to see it as something other and not get into understanding how the people of that time inhabited their world. And there's always a struggle with history to be able to not just see them as precursors to us, but to see them as, but as a way to get inside the sort of lived moments of people in the past. And I think this is something there's something very similar going to here. If you're not part of the community that made this game, then it's very easy, if you're thoughtless, to sort of other them and put it apart. And I think the performative aspect of it is really interesting in that it pulls you in and asks you to sort of live as somebody else. And to live a life where there are different constraints in the world than you may be accustomed to.
I think that in itself is one of the big powers of an interactive medium like this, that because you have to live this girl's life and live as the fox, that you're able to empathize with them far more, and through them empathize with their community and the culture.
I think we're getting close to 10 minutes. Should we?
Yeah, we should probably open up the Q&A.
So we played a little, but we also wanted there to be time for Q&A. And so if people have thoughts or questions or want to ask us to riff on something or play the game again.
Should I say that again? Okay. For games for social change, when you're looking at things like bias or dehumanization, there are some pretty standard ways that you can assess the change for something like that. But for something like this is culture. And there's a little bit more of an overarching ephemeral quality to that. How do you go about assessing the impact of games like this?
Well, the thing is, sometimes, things like community problems can be part of culture. A very big part of my upbringing was, I was introduced as Manuel Marcano because in my tribe we take European-sounding names on top of our tribal names. So that's actually a part of our culture. That's something that my tribe does. And if I were going to make a game, then I would maybe incorporate a character that did that. So I think that I don't think that there actually is like a specific way to go about these things, and it's best to just include people who have lived that kind of thing in order to make things more authentic. That answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, to keep it being personal, I present myself as very European. However, my family history in Oklahoma was Cherokee. And the Cherokees have a long history of intermarrying with Europeans, which is why I look very, very white. But there was my father had deliberately kind of erased a lot of his history as sort of being very assimilated. And I think that there's, for sort of measuring the impact of this, I think it's measured by the impact of the people who both make it and consume it. So I don't know if you can do like metrics, but it's kind of like, what is the effect of this community, of the community to do this? Are they selling it? Are they providing jobs? And just to have representations, I mean, my father deliberately ran away from his Indian identity because that was not a thing that you wanted to represent yourself as even in Oklahoma in the 1950s. But to have these representations of people and ways to be, even if there's no obvious metric for measuring, well, did people learn about? It doesn't really matter if they learned about it. Did people learn how to be themselves and learn how to be other types of people? I think is the sort of the key takeaway. Does that answer? Is that, I don't know.
Well, to add one more thing to that, games like Never Alone are the reason that I'll come out and say that I'm Huracan and not Manuel. Like, they actually are able to give me my own identity. Any other questions?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to see if anybody else does. Oh, I think there's one
Back.
right there. Yeah.
Hey.
Sadly, we only have a tracked mode and are able to play the game, so.
Nicole Lazaro from Zio Design. Awesome game. Love Never Alone. I've seen it and played it a number of times. It was really remarkable, your comments about how you felt as the fox, or how you felt as the girl. There were discrete emotions that came from the mechanics or the actions that players were taking, that you guys were taking in the game. I was curious, for the developers, how intentional was that, and what kinds of emotions, or what were your, sort of your design guidelines, or what were your design goals in creating those emotions that emerge from the characters? Because I completely agree.
Well, neither one of us were associated with developing it, so I don't know if you have any insight into their.
I do not.
Okay. I mean, I'm just responding purely as a player. I mean, whether intentional. It's always hard to say with games whether somebody actually sat down and said, oh, we're going to make the fox bow that way because it feels playful, or whether they just said, oh, this feels good when he does it. I have no idea if they planned it or not, but they succeeded in I think in achieving it for both of us. That there's, and I think to just sort of soapbox for a little, there's this sense of that if games are going to like be educational and tell people things, that the things they tell have to be explicit. But a lot of times, a lot of the most powerful things we learn for games are completely ineffable. They're not things we can, after we play them, we can't actually articulate what it is that we've learned from playing them. But the playing gets embedded in us. We have a sense of like, oh, this is a way of being within the world. This is a way of moving. This is a way of relating. And that sort of codependency that existed, just even there at the very beginning between the fox and the girl, that becomes something that is carried within us as we move forward, even if we can't articulate that we've learned that thing. So I think it goes both ways. It's both, is the designer deliberately intending it, and can we even articulate what we have learned from a well-played game after we've played it?
I mean, a lot of these animation specifics and mechanic specifics, they have to have been done intentionally. Like they're so specific that it feels as though the game was made to be played that way. Any other questions? There's one down here.
What did you?
Yeah, since your game is this month available to a large number of people through a subscription service, have you noticed any feedback or interesting results of having it in front of kind of this, people who are not necessarily interested in this subject from the get-go, but maybe are drawn to it through the game?
Well, it's not our game, but
But have you heard or, yeah.
the fact that it's available to people for free on PS Plus, the fact that it was featured heavily on Nintendo Directs and on Xbox Live, the fact that it's in the mainstream and was on the front page of Steam is a very big deal. Like this is one of the only games that's had a really good cultural representation, and on top of that, it's actually being pushed to the max amount of people. people who are buying Call of Duty have seen this game. So I think it's definitely important to have that mainstream appeal, to have as many eyes on it as possible, because then more people can learn.
Yeah, I'm with PlayStation, and I can't speak directly to how people would have responded to this, but I know in general how people respond to PlayStation Plus. There's a fairly eclectic audience on PlayStation, and people are willing to try even very, very bizarre things that are released. I think the fact that it is so accessible as it reads as game as opposed to some of the crazy things that have been released like Linger in Shadows or some of the really sort of more avant-garde experiences. I think that already it is accessible to people who are unfamiliar with the culture in the way that something that was more sort of aggressively arty would not be. So is a way of sort of opening up a culture to more people. I think it works really, really well because the mechanics that are presented themselves are not something that feel exclusionary. It gives you a doorway in, and then once you're in, you sort of discover a way to play that is culturally acculturating. That there's a doorway in, but once you're in that space, it's something that has a very particular way that it feels to play.
I think that's about it. Maybe one question?
We could do one more.
Yeah.
Hi, you mentioned before about how it seemed less supernatural and more that the spirits were just a given part of the world around you. So in terms of how you would categorize this game, would you say that instead of World of Warcraft, which is like a very fantastical lore, and in the Neverland page they called this a world game, what kind of adjectives would you use to describe this fantasy to separate it from our normal run-of-the-mill Tolkien kind of fantasy?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, it's tricky because once you say fantasy, then you're almost saying that there's something that's going to be unnatural or magical in it. And I think that one of the things I don't even know if I would describe this as a fantasy. I mean, it's a fantasy in the sense that anything fictional is fantastic, but I think it actually reads as a world where these are natural features, where the spirits are so embedded in everyday experience that they're not fantastic. And so I don't know if I was describing to somebody, I don't know if I would describe it as a fantasy game because it doesn't have that quality of escape that I associate with fantasies of like let's go to another time or another place. It feels almost like let's live in something that is a different way of living, and these spirits are features of that different way of living, not supernatural presences.
Well, that's about all the time we've got.
Oh yeah, and they sorry. Thank you very much. We're down to like 20 seconds. So,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting us play you. And now I no longer have to hold off. I can now go play the whole thing.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.